Hey everyone, it's Colin. How's it going? In a previous video, we went for a ride on my new e-bike, this thing. I asked in that video if you wanted a review, and to my surprise, an overwhelmingly positive response, so let's go. This is a Jupiter Discovery X5. It is an e-bike, although it's really more e than bike, and we'll kind of get into that later when we talk about the overall riding experience. I just wanted to go through some of the features and all of that first. As you can see, it's got kind of a single frame design, and this bit in the middle is one of the things that initially attracted me to it, in that it folds in half for storage and transport. Along those lines, you can also fold the pedals in as well, just to get them kind of out of the way for when you're transporting it around. And also, you'll notice there's this little rollerblade wheel underneath. That's to protect the chain ring when it's folded up so that the chain ring doesn't sit on the ground. Obviously, it's got relatively small wheels and tires, and some people may have a problem with that. I don't. I think it's fine. Overall, the bike rides really smooth and it handles bumps fairly well, especially on the backside since it does have a shock absorber system. There's the pivot point there. Obviously, since this is an e-bike, one of the most important features is the motor. It is a 350 watt hub motor built into the rear wheel there. You can see on this side, you've got this metal plate, and then on the other side, you've got this little nub. That is a rare earth magnet that will snap onto that plate, so when the bike is folded up, the whole thing just stays together and doesn't flop around on you. Along those lines as well, all the cabling, for the most part, is internally routed, or at least routed really well. You can see it kind of follows along the underside of the frame here. Obviously, some of it needs to stay loose and out the front, and that's because the handlebars will fold down as well. Up front, you've got a reflector and an LED light, and the LED light is powered off of the battery in the bike itself. There's also built into the back of the seat this blinking red LED. Unfortunately, it does have separate batteries, and I don't know if I can get you a decent view of it, but the on-off button is right here where my thumb is, and it's in a really unfortunate position because that's where you naturally want to grab the seat, like if you want to raise or lower it. So I purposely never took the little tab out for the batteries specifically in here. I've heard of other people accidentally turning this light on, not realizing it, and then the batteries dying on them. I don't plan on doing much riding at night anyway, so it doesn't really matter. The seat itself, you can see, has some springs in there as well. It's decently padded, and I think it's fairly comfortable. I wouldn't mind if it was a little bit wider, but overall, for moderately long rides, hour or two, in general, it's fine. But again, when we get into talking about the riding experience, you'll kind of understand why I'm not too worried about the seat. The only bit of assembly you really need to do with the bike when you get it is put these fenders on. It's just a single screw, so both the rear and the front fenders in here. You don't have to put them on if you don't want to, but otherwise the bike comes fully assembled, just folded up inside its box. So overall, getting this thing going, it's not like, buying a bike from a store where it's like a whole bunch of parts that you got to figure out how to put together yourself. It's more or less ready to ride when you first get it. So here's kind of the rider's view of the bike. Since I got it a couple of months ago, I've added a couple of things that don't normally come with it. Specifically, this bell I added myself, and then also this GoPro camera mount I added on my own. This is the main control panel for the bike. You can press and hold this M button for a couple of seconds to turn the bike on, and you'll notice the display is also backlit. It shows you battery life, and it will give you exact percentages. It's not just like a full 75, 50, 25 kind of a thing. It'll say like 97% or whatever. So you get a pretty decent idea as to how much charge you have left on this thing as you're riding. It also gives you speed in miles or kilometers per hour. You can toggle that. And then down here, you get kind of a trip odometer as to how far you've gone since you turned the bike on. It's not like a total odometer, it's just for that trip. This number 1 down in the corner refers to the various levels of power that the bike can offer. The lowest level is level 0, and that's effectively no electrical assist coming off the motor at all. There's like a very, very tiny amount, but you're more or less pedaling this thing on your own. You can step through 3 additional levels, 1, 2, and 3. The big difference between them is basically the max speed of the motor. This is what they call kind of a cadence assist or cadence driven type of bike. So more or less, the motor is going to want to turn as you push the pedals. That said, you've also got a twist throttle on this side, kind of like, you know, a scooter or a motorcycle. So if you want to get started from a stop without pushing the pedals, or if you just want to ride and not, you know, pedal at all, like you're tired or something like that, or maybe you want to dial in an exact speed, you can use the throttle control on this side to help you out with that as well. So the speeds are something like 10 miles an hour max for level 1, 14-ish miles an hour for level 2, and then max speed is somewhere in the like 17 to 18-ish miles per hour for assist level 3. We'll talk about how the motor can help you as we go for a ride and what all those different levels mean in reality. This is a clamp mechanism for the handlebars, so if you need to twist the handlebars to turn to be more comfortable, that's where that's done. You also notice that there are 2 brakes on here. There's both front and rear brakes. We'll take a look at those brakes in a sec. But they've also got cutout switches on them. So that's kind of nice, where if you hit either brake, it will prevent the motor from fighting you. It basically cuts the motor out. So here's a look at one of the brakes. It's the same setup both front and back. It's a disc brake setup. It is cable driven. My understanding is that these are fairly standard parts, so if you do need to get a replacement disc or replacement pads or anything in this assembly, you should be able to find them reasonably easily. Same thing with the tires and the tubes. You should be able to find fairly standard replacement parts for a lot of the wear items on this bike. Now, some of the electronic parts, that's going to be a different story. Like how the hub motor is kind of built into the rear wheel here. If you start to have problems with that, that's a different consideration entirely. But for the most part, for casual riding, you know, you should be able to get any of the parts that you need for this bike from like a local shop or online. You shouldn't necessarily have to go back to the manufacturer. So here's what the bike looks like all folded up. And like I said at the beginning, this is one of the kind of major drivers for me wanting to buy this, just because it ends up physically about half the size as when it's unfolded. Obviously, it's going to be a bit wider, but you can also see how the magnet assembly works to hold these wheels together. The handlebars fold over and down to the side, and then you've got that little rollerblade wheel kind of deal protecting the chain ring. You can remove the seat, of course. It's just a quick release down there. And something worth noting is they actually marked the heights on the seat post so that when you do take the bike apart and put it back together, you can get it back to, you know, where you wanted it. This little rivet, by the way, is to prevent you from putting the seat down too far so that it would hit the bottom of the frame when it's under compression because of the shock absorber, like when you're out riding or whatever. So that's pretty nice. It's got this quick release latch. This is a latch that holds the bike together when you're riding. It is positive action, so you don't really have to worry about it flipping open on you as you ride. You have to press down this while you pull it out, so that's pretty nice. And then this also gives you an opportunity to see kind of some of the internal electric parts of the bike. These are the contacts that connect to the battery. So here's the battery. It actually is removable. I know on some other e-bikes, at least in this price class, they're not. And it locks inside the chassis. It is the same key for all of them. So don't think of this as too much of an anti-theft type of a deal, but it is kind of nice. And the battery pack comes out as a single unit, which is pretty slick. What's also nice is that little rubber flap. That's a second charging port for the battery, which I really, really like to see, simply because it means that, one, if you do use this bike for something like commuting, then you can take the battery pack out and charge it separate from the bike Like if you need to park the bike somewhere, but then you want to charge the battery, you can take it out and bring it up to your desk or whatever and charge it at your desk. It also means that if you leave the bike stored somewhere for a length of time, like if you can't ride it all year long, like is the case with where I live, I'm going to need to put this in storage for the winter, you can pull the battery out and keep it somewhere in a better climate. Like instead of leaving it in the garage by itself all winter, you can pull it out and leave it in the house and periodically charge it up. There is a separate charging port, but it's built into the side of the frame, so you don't have to take the battery out in order to charge the bike either. They give you two options, which is honestly really nice to see. All right, guys, I feel like I'm pretty much out here by myself. The trail's pretty quiet. So I realize I just hit you up with a whole bunch of like specifications and features and all that kind of stuff. Let's back up a second and talk about like why did I buy an e-bike to begin with and why this one? I'm not a bike expert. I'm not an e-bike expert. In fact, after buying this bike, it's the first time I've really been on a bike in something like 15 years. I just wasn't really into it that much. What I wanted was simply something that was fun, that was convenient for more casual rides. Nothing serious. I'm not commuting with this. I'm not trying to win or even participate in races. Just something that's good for, I don't know, cruising around the park paths on a weekend. Basically what I'm doing today. So let's talk about comfort. Overall, I think this bike is pretty comfortable to ride. Like I mentioned, I wish the seat was a little bigger. You know, for riding for a couple hours through the park, it's fine. I wouldn't do the Tour de France on this, but you know, I think for most people, most body types, you're going to be in good shape. Now, as for body types, Jupiter says that the maximum weight limit's about 250 pounds. They don't really have anything about height, like how tall you can be or short you can be to ride this comfortably. There are upper and lower seat limits, of course. For me, at my height, I'm about 6 feet tall. I feel like I'm not hunched over too much. It's fairly comfortable. You know, as kind of a cruiser, as more of a comfortable ride, you want to be sitting a little more upright, you know? So you're not bent over, you're not hurting your back, but also the big thing for me is so you don't feel like you're, you know, craning your neck forward like that, because that hurts the back of your neck after a while. I feel like I can sit fairly upright on this bike, even with the seat in a fairly comfortable position, which is really nice. Just like your comfort and everything kind of varies depending on your body type, battery life is going to vary as well. Now, Jupiter lists a maximum range of about 30 miles or so, they claim. I think that's actually pretty accurate, believe it or not. A lot of times manufacturers operate that. You know, one would think, oh, 30 miles, that's going to be with like no motor assist and you pedaling the entire time and it's, you know, downhill both ways and all that kind of stuff. In this case, I'm actually getting numbers that I think are pretty close to that, unless the battery meter on the bike is horribly broken, which I don't think is the case, but could be. Obviously, the battery range, you know, battery life is going to vary depending on how much assist you have, but most of my riding has been with assist level 1, just kind of the basic one, and pedaling along with. And occasionally I'll kick it up to assist level 2 or 3. I've got it in 2 right now to help me get up a hill more easily. And, you know, it's going to affect the battery life a little bit, but as long as you switch it back, it's actually not that much. I've done longer rides that have been a little bit more hilly and where I've dug into the battery a little bit more, you know, helping more with the assist. And after, say, 15 miles or so, I'm sitting at, I don't know, 55, 60%, somewhere in there. So, I mean, unless battery life just drops off a cliff past 50%, you know, overall, I think the range of 30 miles is pretty reasonable. Now, speaking of those assist levels, it's not a very even or linear application of power that the motor does. It's very kind of on-off. Now, that's not necessarily bad, and it is something that you get used to very quickly. But it means that you're going to be switching through those assist levels a lot more frequently than you would otherwise think. I figured, I would just want to have kind of a nice casual ride, so I'll just set it to 2 and leave it there the entire ride. No, I'm frequently bouncing back and forth. I think it works fine as a system. It's just something that you've got to keep in mind, is that you can't expect to just creep along at like 5 miles an hour and let the motor help you pedal. It's basically, as soon as you start pedaling, the motor wants to take you up to 10 miles an hour, for like that level 1 assist, and then upwards from there. If you're on level 1 and you want to go faster than 10 miles an hour, well, just pedal faster and harder, right? And if you need to go up a hill and you don't want to pedal as hard, just up the assist level. Now, that said, the gearing on this bike really kind of makes you have to use the electric motor. It's a single speed bike. So like I'm going up kind of a big hill now, it would be really hard for me to pedal the bike manually up this big hill. So I find myself, upping to like level 2 or 3 on the motor assist to help get me up the hill. You can ride this bike without the electric assist. I wouldn't do it. And that's kind of why I said, towards the beginning of the episode, why I see this as being more of a more E than bike. You can ride it manual if you want, but it's going to tire you out quick without assist, unless it's like perfectly flat ground the entire time. The gearing is really meant more to help sustain momentum and not overcome gravity, I guess is the short way of saying it. That bridge. Oh, they weren't lying about that. Oh, I guess that's a good enough excuse as any to talk about just the shock absorption and all that. It works generally pretty well, but obviously you've got smaller wheels and tires, so bumps are going to feel bigger than they would if you're on a bigger bike. But between the seat and that rear shock, it kind of smooths it out. You don't really get off this thing after a long ride feeling like you've been beaten up, I guess is what I'm trying to say. The brakes work well enough. I do appreciate that they're disc brakes instead of those really cheap clampy on the rim kind of brakes that you get, when you buy the $100 bicycle. The parts situation for this bike is interesting. You can buy some of the more esoteric replacement parts directly from Jupiter. I'm sure they'd sell you a motor if you needed one. On their website, they list things like batteries. The problem is, they're expensive. Now, I would expect to get at least several years of life out of them, but let me put it this way. If/when the battery in this bike dies, I'm going to be more inclined to try to take it apart and replace the cells myself than I would be to spend the amount of money they're asking for a factory replacement. That said, this isn't necessarily unique to Jupiter. It's just kind of the way this entire lower end e-bike segment is. They highly integrate the components to drive down the cost. So if you're worried about ultimate reliability and easy to find replacement parts that are cheap and all that, you're probably not in the market for a bike like this anyway. You're probably more hardcore than that. And that brings me back to the notion that this is really just more meant for casual riding, just for hanging out, cruising around, nothing too serious. You're not going to be putting tons and tons of miles on it or anything like that. For short commutes, you could probably get away with it. And the fact that it folds is nice. It's not terribly lightweight though. It weighs about 40 pounds. So I wouldn't necessarily consider it like a portable bike or one you could travel with really. But if you do have a shorter commute, the ability to fold it up, you could stash it under your desk at work, charge it up. It's also easy if you do want to, put it in the car and take it somewhere where you're not really having to carry it with you. physically pick it up so much. It's easy to fit in the back of the car, at least a lot easier than the typical bike is. So you don't have to necessarily worry about buying one of those dorky bike racks that hangs off the back or anything. You can just throw it in the back. I was able to fit 2 of these in a pretty typical crossover. So I guess the last thing then to talk about is price and value, because that's in some ways the most important thing. Obviously 2020 has been weird. Lots of people have been looking for exercise equipment, just stuff that helps them be outdoors. This particular model has been going kind of in and out of stock as I've been keeping an eye on it. And I bought it a little bit later into the season. I bought it in July-ish, late June. And the price has varied quite a bit. I've seen it typically sell for about $900 to $950. That's a little high, I think, for what you get out of it. I mean, if it fits your needs perfectly, I think you could justify that price, but occasionally there are deals to be had. I ended up buying mine from Costco, who occasionally has had them in stock, and they wanted $600. Now at $600, if you can find one of these for that price, that's a lot easier of a sell. It makes a lot more sense. In fact, that price made so much sense, we ended up buying 2, and my wife has one too. So, it really kind of comes down to how much are you going to use it, what are you going to use it for, and how much value does having the e-bike thing really, benefit you. It definitely rides more comfortably like a bigger bike would. There are plenty of really cheap e-bikes out there that you can get for $300-ish bucks. But some of those don't even have pedals. I mean, they're like a bike. They've got, 2 wheels front and back. But some of those just have pegs you ride on. They've got less powerful motors, less capacity in the battery, so shorter range, less speed. I wouldn't go smaller than this, let's just say, for the kind of rides, recreational rides that I do. If you look at it from that perspective, if that's what you're interested in, this bike is a really good fit. It doesn't take itself too seriously, I guess. So with that, if you like the episode, I appreciate a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at thisdoesnotcomp. And as always, thanks for watching. Oh, and I forgot to mention, there's a horn.